Good evening, Miss Donnie.
Hmm?
This is David Spikes and Caleb tells this project on Chinese immigrants, factory workers, and African Americans during the Gilded Age. So Caleb's gonna start off by asking me a couple of questions about my knowledge on the Chinese railroad. I mean the Chinese railroad workers.
And then and then he's gonna ask me questions, and then we'll go off script
Yes,
about black people doing the good at Asian stuff.
yes.
All right. What time period did the Chinese railroad workers arrive in?
They arrived between 1865 and 1869, I believe.
What part of the country did they arrive in to live in?
They arrived around the western part of the United States.
Yes, yes, like California
Hmm.
and California and Washington mainly.
Yes.
But they were also in New York before that as well. In addition
Yeah,
to
they
that.
had. Well, they had. Yeah, they originally had went to New York first, and then they started to migrate west.
Yeah, and that's how they got Chinatown now. But we'll talk about that later.
Yes.
What kind of discrimination did they face the most?
They mainly faced low wages, dangerous working conditions, and social isolation, which greatly impacted them, and which greatly impacted the Chinese community.
What was the response by Chinese or by state governments to Chinese immigration?
The government they basically enacted discriminatory laws against them, which prevented them from getting businesses, jobs, and even housing. And they even went as furthest as inciting violence towards them.
So how were the Chinese doing economically during the time?
Um, the Chinese they were facing political discrimination at the time, and the calling act. I mean, the calling exclusion act of 1882 basically, you know, it basically enacted the political discrimination because it restricted Chinese immigrants from doing a lot of things.
Yeah, yeah. And so the Chinese, once they were finding out that they were being discriminated against legally, they started legally add, they started creating their own law firms.
Yeah, like
They made
they
their own
basically like they created their
different
own.
towns.
Yeah, they
Mini
fought
Chinatown.
they fought back the legal way, like by winning cases, becoming lawyers. What else did they do? Getting their citizenships. Just a lot of things that could help them out to further their better. You know, how I say this life.
And so they became very self-sufficient. And so actually, when it comes to politically and when it comes to economically, the Chinese were doing well for a group that was socially discriminated against. But how were the damn Chinese doing socially at that time?
During that time, during
And what did political discrimination look like for them?
I'll say so in the 19th and early 20th century, American, Chinese immigrants, they was facing a very significant social political discrimination that basically included economic racial prejudice and legal restriction like the Chinese Exclusion Act, which restricted their immigration and denied them citizenship, which that also affected them in the way of
All right,
becoming American citizens.
all right. And now it's my turn.
So, Caleb, I have a couple of questions for you
Oh yeah,
on industrialization.
factory workers.
Yeah, on the fact, basically on the factors, but basically like urbanization, industrialization, and what effect did it have on the workers? So,
And so industrialization caused many workers to go from working on farms owned by themselves or by landowners or by their families to working in factories. Cities were built around factories, and the process that was called ur- urbanization. This process forced workers to live in cities and also stripped them of their self-sufficiency, which stripped them of their social and much of their economic power. according to the Immigration and Urbanization Stations PDF, on Canvas. Only 25 only 25 American cities had populations larger than 50,000 in 1870, and by 1900, 40% of Americans lived in cities, and our population was around 74 million when we were in like 1900. So that's 40% of 75 million. That's a lot of people.
How do you think? What is your opinion on urbanization and how it affect workers?
Um, that's what I just answered.
Say it again.
Yeah, that's what I just answered.
Oh, my bad. I apologize.
Yeah. Next question.
What workplace conditions were laborers put in?
So the equipment at the time was like insanely dangerous, frequently taking off limbs and fingers of workers.
Wasn't it like put inside
Um,
the food and whatnot, and people had to eat it?
yeah. But like that's the living conditions,
Oh my.
too. Um, and there's pictures that like I have like in the script the document, Miss Dolly, that you can see is from like on campus as well. So that's where I pulled my like um pulled my sources from mainly, because neither of us have like all the work that we've done. I couldn't find mine at home, and I guess that David didn't get his back, and so while in the mines, workers would get black lung from mining, or 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 they could die due to use of like explosives like nitroglycerin. Um, and children were employed to work in these factories because they could be paid less and could fit into small places. And those pictures of children like literally working on like I think that that's a meal. I think that that's a meal. Yeah. Um. All right. Next question.
What living conditions were laborers forced to endure?
The living quarters of workers were cramped, having to be shared with many
Take your time.
other workers. Most did not have refrigeration, and in one photo, food was put up high like high level like above the floor, so rats couldn't try to steal it and just do what rodents do, and try to eat it, and that would mess up the whole living quarters because there was like 40 people in one room, and so that's a lot of food that they had to hang up as well. The living quarters of, of, of these workers, tenements at this time were usually owned by their employers or landlords. The disease was rampant in these tight conditions. And here's a picture that's on the script about just how bad the conditions looked. The walls are not kept up. They barely have beds. They're all cramped together. So that's question though.
Okay, I want to try to answer some of these questions too, because I can go off the top of my head and like answer them. So like I want to do the this one right here, the how did they report conditions.
Um.
Part two, to this, part two to this. Okay.
Yeah. Because the phone cut out.
Methods. Okay, so the ideal question right now is, what methods did unions use to push for labor reforms? Some of those included, I'm going to say like two. I'm going to say strikes, because those basically were to stop working until their demands were met. And also boycotts, which involved not buying a specific product. And lobbying, which involved contacting your local politicians to advocate for you. They were effective and ultimately pushed through reforms like banning child labor, minimum wage, and like the 8 hours of work day. What is your opinion on that?
Um, yeah, David is spot on with that, especially with how unions help push through the 8 hour workday. Because prior to that, people would work for like 12 hours, 14 hours, on end, without restriction. And it was only through unions that that could be achieved.
The next question is, this is a both, we can both answer. How were how no how did unions improve the status of workers? I said they improved it, by pushing for safeguard worker rights, meaning, all that cutting off your fingers and getting exposed to toxins, dying from, just being inside the work environment, all the people that are getting sick in there, they were basically protecting the people that were working there. And then workers were able to make more money, suffer less mortality, and eventually increase the social and specialize into different jobs, causing the creation of a massive middle class, or what we now call middle class people. What is your opinion on that?
Um, yeah, because so that decrease in mortality comes from the safer working conditions, which came from the creation of workers' regulations laws, factory regulation laws that stated like you can't just have your equipment be this dangerous, or you need people to like come inspect your buildings and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Come to like inspect your workplace to see if like your workers are being kept in a safe environment. Um, and the push for unions to push for all these rights is what led to workers being able to gather enough power socially, gather enough power economically to be able to start their own businesses and to be able to specialize into the different jobs, be it going back to college and getting a degree in something else, and then going to move up the social ladder to be able to become middle class. That's why, like, I think the number is like 40, 50, 60% of Americans now will be considered middle class. Like, we'll really have a big lower class here because of the strength that the unions have gathered. Let me do last three. Do you want to ask them to me,
Caleb, you
or
can't ask me that during the presentation.
huh?
You can't ask me that during the presentation.
Read them out. So and so like as let me just read them out. So as for like a overview, workers during the Gilded Age politically were strong due to their numbers, but they were marginalized when they were separated like by by their bosses and stuff, because many workers were banned from joining unions. They would have like union busting, which was trying to break up unions. And unions was the way that workers would gather together their strength in numbers and stuff. The creation of unions helped to unite workers, which would allow them to realize their true political strength, and this strength ushered in the progressive era. And then, like for economically, workers were very suppressed due to low wages and long hours, and they were dependent on their bosses and landlords for places to stay and like for a wage to buy food and stuff. And labor reforms was how they were able to and prosper. What do you think about that, David?
I think that you're spot on with your with your answers, and I wanted to add in that workers were socially marginalized during the Gilded Age due to little social mobility. But however, after their economic prosperity and political clout grew, industrial workers became part of the social norm.
And so that's it for the script, Miss Donnelly. But we're gonna go off script
Yeah.
for our third one,
Yeah.
which is the African Americans. David, what is Jim Crow?
What is what? Say it again.
What is Jim Crow?
Jim Crow is a set of discriminatory laws in place to take down and dehumanize black people as a community and as a whole.
I never thought I'd
So
hear that.
so you say the question again, please?
So how did Jim Crow prevent black people from gathering power throughout the South?
Jim, say it one more time.
How did Jim Crow prevent black people from gathering power throughout the South?
It basically it prevented them from getting power in the South because the laws were in place to separate blacks and whites from each other, which at the time we all know that whites had more power economically and physically. So it basically stopped the people in the South from getting power and basically kind of dehumanized them as people.
Yeah, and so I'd like to build on to that by saying that first, the black people throughout the South, like right after slavery, like even though we were like on the come up, like we still didn't have the economic power that white people had because we didn't have land and they just had like accumulated a lot more wealth. And like a big thing at the time was business, was being able to own your own business. And so black people couldn't really sell to white people. They could only sell to other black people, usually. And these other black people didn't have as much money. So not only were we cut out of buying from like white people the things that we might need or trying to buy land or being next to them, but then we were also cut out of the opportunity to be able to sell to the rest of the United States.
Uh-huh.
You know? And that would hamper any group. My next question is, what is the Great Migration?
Say it one more time. You kind of muffled.
What is the Great Migration?
Okay. So the Great Migration basically was like a historical movement of black Americans from the rural South and to the cities in the North and Western between I think 1916 and 1970. It was driven by factors such as injustice, racial violence, and lack of economic support opportunities in the South.
Yeah. And so the Great Migration was a period from like the early 1900s all the way to the 60s of black people first moving north to the mines, to Pittsburgh, to Cleveland, to work in ports.
30 seconds.
Or work in factories, mills, like with Detroit or like with Philadelphia. What were you going to add, David?
No, I was telling you we had 30 seconds until it closed out on us.
We'll just stop it here.
Well, yes, Ms. Donnelly, this is me and Caleb's project on the Chinese railroad immigrants, factory workers, and black people during the Gilded Age, and how they were affected as black people in the community. And yeah, thanks, Caleb, for having me.
All right, thanks, David.